I don't think it's a big secret that to many, California is considered a failed state. Rampant homelessness and crime, household items on shelves are locked up rather than people who steal them, a bureaucratic government that takes an extraordinarily high percentage of taxes from the people yet fails to keep water in the reservoirs during fire season. Now, you may think you're safe living wherever it is you're living that's not California, but think again. California isn't an anomaly, it's a creation, and many other states are following suit. That is, unless you know the reasons for California's demise and do whatever it takes to ensure it doesn't happen to your home. Our guest tonight is Christopher Moritz. He's a California native, attorney, and author of the new book, Failed State, A Portrait of California in the Twilight of Empire. Chris, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here.
Oh, delighted.
Well, this is a timely topic because I just moved out of California just this last weekend. I hightailed it out because, as the name of your book, it does feel like a failed state. And I just could not justify staying there anymore, could not justify the premium cost that California is when we are living in so much squalor and homelessness everywhere, and we have to call an attendant to get some shaving cream out of the case when you go to a CVS or a Walgreens. I mean, it's just it's become unlivable. But you're still there. You've been there your whole life. You were born and raised. Your family's from there. So you've seen it all. You've seen California go from the glory days to where it's at right now. And you blame it on what exactly?
Well, let me first say this. Gavin Newsom posted today that California has risen from the fifth largest economy in the world, the fourth largest economy of the world. And this sort of metric has been often used by the Democratic Party to tout the success of the state and also to even suggest that we are almost like a country unto ourselves. But the fact is that if we were to be a country unto ourselves, what we would look like is not the United States. It's really not like a first world country. It's actually much more akin to Latin America, where there's an enormous bifurcation between a ruling elite that represent maybe 10% of the population and an underclass of dependents. 40% of Californians are on some sort of state benefits, primarily Medi-Cal, although we've also just recently opened that up to illegal aliens at the cost of $13 billion a year. This bifurcation of our political economy seems to just be getting worse and worse and worse every year.
Yeah. And do you blame it on Gavin Newsom specifically, or do you think this is a problem that's been going on for a while?
Yeah, there's no single villain. There's many villains who contribute, and Gavin is certainly amongst them. But Gavin really actually, like so many state officials, Kamala Harris is a great example too, they really are not, sort of like leading the charge or putting policies in place on their own volition or having some sort of independence and of themselves as leaders. They represent a constituent corporate class. And in the case of Gavin Newsom, he is basically a product, literally a product owned by the Getty family, who has created his entire career. His entire fortune has come through these corridors in San Francisco, particularly in an area called Pacific Heights. So we're effectively ruled and had this sort of trade-off in a rule between Gavin Newsom and Jerry Brown and the Gettys, who are involved with both families, and then their sort of ancillaries like Kamala Harris. Mm-hmm. It's a nexus. And it's a cabal, really. But the single party state, which has exacerbated all of these problems, did not happen by accident. It happened by design. It happened by policies of demographic engineering starting in the late 90s, but really accelerating in the kind of in the Newsom years, I would say, and it's such that California is now 27% foreign born. In the 90s, that was I think 16 or 17%.
Mm-hmm.
So it's the highest in the nation. And as I indicated, like we have, more poverty in kind of on a volume basis than anywhere else in the country as well. And the gap between the top and the bottom is unlike anything else in the country by far. So that's why I say, like, California, if you look at it as a as a single polity, if it was its own country, is not going to look like the United States.
Mm-hmm. Right. So when you say that it was by design, so explain what the motivation, how did they do this, and what was the motivation to do it? Why would they do it?
Right. Well,
because I think a lot of people would look at California and say this was just this is now just the result of a lot of really bad policies that liberals have had over the years, and they've just kind of continued to run these policies, and policy after policy building up one after the other, and that's what created California into the mess that it is. But you're saying, no, this was actually a plan.
Yeah, I think that, so to go back, my book is primarily about crime, because there's a lot of different ways to look at the let's say to give an autopsy to California, but my book is specifically on crime, and I think that with respect to crime and the chaos that we see and have seen, from the rise of burglaries to these smash and grabs that have and kind of mob riots, flash mobs at Nordstrom's, et cetera, et cetera. Like these things are not happening spontaneously. They began back in 2010 when a series of laws were put into place to, quote, address the crisis of mass incarceration. And a Supreme Court case called Brown v. Plata helped kind of mandate California to try and reduce over prison population. But the state's response to that was effectively to simply release prisoners into county jails and then ultimately back into the street. And they do so through manipulation of language, manipulation of even how, let's say, a ballot initiative appears on the ballot. So, to give you an example, most famously, we have Prop 47. It's generally known, I think, nationally, but just as a refresher, it was effectively to decriminalize a number of felonies, including drug possession, but infamously, theft under $950 would be deemed a misdemeanor. This passed in 2014. Now, the other angle to that is that misdemeanors, under the premise of prosecutorial discretion, are generally not prosecuted. So you can continue to commit misdemeanor after misdemeanor, $950 again and again and again, without any consequence. This law was billed as the, quote, Safe Neighborhoods and Schools Act. Kamala Harris actually wrote the language that appeared on the ballot describing the initiative. And this initiative passed by 60% margin.
How could they say it was safe schools? What did they try to bill it as?
Safe Schools and Safe Schools and Neighborhoods Act.
And this was the one that decriminalized theft under $950?
Right.
And what kind of logic, what was the logic that this would create safe schools? Decriminalize.
You could argue, what was the Inflation Reduction Act have to do with inflation, right? I think what is so pernicious in California is that our political elite manipulate language in a very cynical way to induce the population to vote 60% in favor of basically legalizing stealing.
Right, but what
example.
What do you think the motivation was for decriminalizing the theft? Obviously, that was a big problem. California's recently voted to reverse that. Thank goodness.
Yes.
I mean, it was so bad. I remember going into a CVS, my local CVS in LA, at least three different times, being in there, and a man would walk in, start stealing stuff, like right in front of the security guard, right in front of the employees, and the employees literally whipped out a binder. They had to open up a binder where they would write down what the guy would steal, and they would just let the guy walk out the door. And the lady at the front, she would sometimes holler at the guy and say, "You have no shame. Like, do you not have any shame? You know, look at you doing it again." You know, she kind of yell after him. But the policy was, even for the stores, not to try to stop. You know, they were trying to keep their employees safe. So when this law passed, there was nothing they could really, you know, the cops can't be called because it's not enough. You know, they're just stealing like shaving cream or some food, right?
90%
So it's
of these types of crimes do not result in an arrest.
right. So there was nothing they could really do except holler at the guy. And then CVS just had a policy of just write down what they stole. So I mean, people were just literally getting away with theft. And I watched this happen 3 times before, and now the law is passed, but I don't know even then if the cops are going to do anything about it because the cops are busy with other things. I'm not sure if you called the police, if they would actually arrest somebody who stole some shaving cream and some potato chips. You know, I'm not sure.
Yeah. Well, you know, so I'll bring it to a personal anecdote. The reason I wrote this book was because in 2023, I was the victim of essentially a home invasion robbery 2 nights in a row in my home in Santa Monica, while my brother and I were asleep in the house. An MS-13 gangster broke into the house, stole everything we had, and then came back and did it the next night. The guy who did this is an illegal alien dreamer who had served 7 years in California State Prison for gun crimes. Upon release in 2018, he was immediately deported by the Trump administration back to El Salvador. He comes back into the United States during the Biden, invasion, and then proceeded to go on a rampage and committed dozens of these types of crimes all over Los Angeles, but also in the north, an area called Ventura. In my jurisdiction and in Santa Monica in particular, the response to this crime was so shockingly indifferent that to this day I have not received a phone call, even a follow-up phone call from the detective about the case, or any kind of justice whatsoever. Now, the guy was ultimately arrested in Ventura County to the north, which takes property crime a little bit more seriously, and crime in general a little bit more seriously. And he was only charged, though, with 2 counts of these types of burglaries, and therefore sentenced to about 2 years in jail, probably less than that, and a $300 fine. So, and again, like in LA County, he wasn't charged with any of these, crimes. So I was so flabbergasted by this, and the details of this case were so shocking to me, that I started to begin this investigation about crime in California. And the first prosecutor I talked to, and I talked to dozens of cops and prosecutors in a course of over 30 plus hours of interviews for this book. She said to me, "What's so remarkable about your story is how relatable it is." And I was taken aback by that this could possibly be relatable. And if indeed this is relatable in California, then something is deeply, deeply sick within our criminal justice system. And that leads to the issue of, you asked the motivation for these laws, Prop 47, but others, it stems from criminal justice reform movement, which basically is centered around ideas of equity. And I as I start to distill the underlying tenets of criminal justice reform, I ultimately came to the determination that this can be encapsulated in a term I called crime equity. And the notion of crime equity is that it's an inversion of justice. It's a weaponization of justice, because the ultimate aspiration is a redistribution of the effects of criminality based upon a premise that criminality is a justified response or natural response to systemic oppression. So, as a result, what you have are, the elimination of cash bail in a policy manifestation, defund police, of course, some of these prosecutorial negations like gang enhancements and other things that I've mentioned. And so it's an extremely toxic, frankly, like evil ideology when it's actually put into praxis, because the idea, I would say, is a redistribution of suffering in the name of equity. And that the facts bear that out, because in Los Angeles in particular, we have a situation where crime has spread from areas that were, historically prone to criminality to areas that were once insulated from criminality. Mm-hmm. And the mere fact that property type crimes that have moved into, let's say, the west side of Los Angeles have not been prosecuted is indicative of this sort of mentality that puts the criminals far above the victim and society in general. And so it is, again, part of the equity movement. And I would say that it has historical precedence, frankly. There's been many times in history when political movements have weaponized crime against their perceived enemies. And so I think when we think about criminal justice reform and the so-called crisis of mass incarceration and some of the other language that they use to sort of as euphemism to lull normal Californians to voting for these types of measures or supporting these measures, it is really based on something very insidious.
So this sounds to me like somewhere along the line, the people, which is what we're seeing, the California people, they start to believe in an ideology. They start to believe that, like COVID was a good example of this, where California versus where I'm at now, Idaho, had very different ideologies, and the people really fueled it. It wasn't so much the government, but the people themselves were totally different in their way of thinking. And so California has bought into this. The people are genuinely, I think, generally good on both sides of the aisle. I think people generally want what's best for society and others, and they care. And the issue is that when you care so much that you've allowed it to harm you and harm your own loved ones and harm your family, you're sacrificing the wellness, the health and wellness of the people around you because you care so much about something. And so it sounds to me like Californians have, they want to do what's right. They want to live in a just world. They want to live in a world that's fair and equitable. And so they've bought into, and then there's other groups that take advantage of that feeling. And they say, oh, well, you want, yes, you're upset about racism and you're upset about the history of slavery in this country. You're upset about all these things. And so then these special interest groups, they are able to wield that sensitivity, and they're able to come in and say, well, then, if you really cared, then we would do some criminal justice reform and we would stop sending black people to jail, right? That would be so because you want fairness and you're upset about slavery and what happened to black people, back when in slavery times, even though California didn't have it. But still, they start there, right? And it goes into this. So then therefore, because the criminal justice system tends to target disproportionately blacks over whites, if you were not a racist, which you say you're not, if you're not a racist, then you would want to stop this from happening. And so therefore change all these laws.
It's gaslighting.
Yeah, gaslighting. Right.
What is disturbing to me is that the money behind criminal justice reform in all of its various manifestations, from more moderate kind of attempts to enhance rehabilitation that most people can get behind, to the extreme stuff that I say is really in the realm of that term of crime equity. These initiatives are funded by the most elite, wealthiest institutions in the country. Mm-hmm. I mean, there, of course, George Soros, but I don't like to just dwell on him alone, because there are plenty of others. The Ford Foundation, the Arnold Foundation, Stanford, especially. A lot of the policies that Sacramento put into place came from a guy at Stanford named Mike Romano, who was instrumental in neutering 3 strikes in California. Mm-hmm. So you have a situation again where the super rich, the super elite, Stanford, are pushing an agenda that is resulting manifestly in a diffusion of crime across, let's say, boundaries of safety. And I view that as an attack on the middle class. I think that's what it is. I think that there is, that combined with other type policies that we could go on and on forever for, in the 900,000 regulations that California has in place, other type, environmental restraints that have raised the cost of just living here and effectively crushing the middle class more and more and more. So that, combined with the rise of crime in areas that have been relatively undefended all these years, has just made it such that people are leaving in masses.
Yeah.
8.5 million people left California between 2010 and 2022. Okay. And there was $24 billion in tax revenue lost, I think, over the course of 2020 to 2023. I may have that off, but it's somewhere in that time frame. Mm-hmm. And these, again, are middle class voters who are, by virtue of just what we know about that cohort, moderates.
Yeah.
So it is part of the agenda of political hegemony, and crime policy is part of that.
I just don't understand it. I guess what I'm having a hard time wrapping my brain around is, I would think, with profit motives that many people have, so people are motivated by money, seems that there would be more prisons, more jails, because the prison industrial complex would want to, they make money when people get incarcerated. They don't make money, and certainly the big corporations like Walgreens and CVS don't make any money when people are coming in and stealing $500 worth of stuff here and there. They're losing money, and there's nothing that's stopping that. So I guess what I'm having a hard time understanding, because if elites are running everything, and the elites are the big business, the big corporations, and elites are like the industrial complexes, like the prison industrial complex, then why are they allowing this to just bleed them money? Like, who would be behind it? What would be their actual end motivation?
Great question. I don't believe that the Walmart and type and CVS type corporations are really have an overweight influence in the state. I think it's really more of a nexus of sort of the San Francisco Silicon Valley political economy, right? It is tech. It is the established political leaders like Pelosi's, Brown's, Newsom's, etc. It's this alliance of San Francisco values and tech, and And I think that there is also a fact that there is an incentive, at least, to raise property prices by some of these policies. You might be able to argue. I can tell you for a fact that the rise in private security in California has exploded. And frankly, some of the people that are even behind some of these initiatives are investing in private security businesses. So, look, it's a complicated issue. There's a lot of nuance to it, but the bottom line takeaway, I would say, is that you do have elite institutions who have promulgated laws that are hurting a broader base of the population. And why is that? I don't really know the answer to that. I don't think we can know the answer. There's probably many reasons for that, but it is happening.
Yeah. I think it's runaway ideology. I mean, I just think that the people have gone so insane, trying to be good people, which, look, I commend that. It's great. You want to be a good person. I'm not going to fault somebody for that. But the attempt to be a good person has led to just a slew of really bad decisions. And California is a giant manifestation of that. And I think it's a giant warning sign, which is kind of the point of your book, right? The warning that this could happen to many other states in the country. People don't wake up and see what has happened to the Golden State.
Well, it's interesting. The way you put that, I think, was very clarifying. Because, so let's say these institutions like Ford Foundation, Arnold Foundation, Sanford, etc., the super, super high net worth individuals who poured tons of money into people like George Gascon's campaign. Yes, maybe their kind of ostensible motivation is to, espouse progressivism and promote progressivism, but there also, I think, it is. I call it these laws, like that we've talked about, statutory negligence. They are so, demonstrably dangerous that the people creating them are guilty of some sort of tort against the state because the foreseeability of harm is there. Mm-hmm. So if you have a set of donors who are promoting these kinds of policies that are manifestly dangerous, I would say that there must also be some kind of indifference, at the very least, to the effect these policies are going to have outside of their gated communities.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that it's just from having lived there for a while. In California, I spent 17 years in, and I think that the fundamental issue, I think, in a lot of, it's an interesting case study, California is, because I think we see a lot of special interests, big money interests that have been able to, for example, Washington, D.C., I think is very clearly run by big money interests. And they've got a firm grip on the politicians. They got a firm grip on Congress, and nothing really gets done for the people. It's all for the big money interests. California is a reverse situation where the power is actually in the activists, like we see this with the homelessness. Like, do you remember the homelessness issue in Echo Park where they wanted to clear out Echo Park and actually they were trying to give these people homes. So they were like, okay, we're going to move you, and we have homes, like little homes that we're going to put you in, but that's where you've got to go. And these activists would come out and they were protesting to keep these people homeless. Like, it was the craziest thing to witness was this radical activists that are saying, no, homelessness is like a human right. And if you want to be homeless, you're allowed to be homeless, and you're allowed to be, languishing in the park. I mean, it was so bizarre when the city was saying, no, we've got homes for them now, and we want to put them in these homes, and it's safer, it's better, it's clean, all these things. So the activist class has been able to really sway I think a lot of these wealthy Californians or upper middle class
Yes.
are like white Californians and make them feel really guilty and then make them say, support all of these policies because that'll make you a good person. And all these Californians, they feel bad that they've got all the money and there's all this, there's a big discrepancy with incomes in California. So you got these people that want to feel good about themselves and they then fall for these policies. So California's, and then on top of it, of course, you got a corrupt political class in California. It's a one-party state. What is it? LA City Council makes more money than any other government officials, like except for the president and Anthony Fauci or something. It's like I think they make more money than the governor. I think actually LA City Council members make more money than Gavin Newsom. Their salary is higher, which is insane. But it makes sense when it's just one-party rule and they're feeding themselves and they're not. So you've got a corrupt political class and then you've got a bleeding heart population. And they're not, it's hard to talk sense into a bleeding heart, overly emotional population. And it's lacking the balance of the, of those that that are not so, you have to have balance. I mean, balance is everything. And LA in particular and San Francisco just really lack that balance. And people are just wanting to be good, but then they ruin everything.
Yeah. They asked yourself the question that why is it that in 1994, 72% of Californians supported three strikes? Like we were a different state back then.
Right, totally. Yeah.
And so
it's a
the
good
question is why and how?
Yeah. I mean, again, I think it just comes down to the bleeding heart mentality when people were pointed out, well, you're a bad person because you're allowing these inequalities to happen. And then believing that the inequalities are because of racism or rather than there's inequalities that are stemming from other issues like socioeconomic. If you want to talk about crime, a lot of that is socioeconomic driven, it's not racial, but then rather than saying, well, we're arresting all of these people of one particular demographic for committing crimes, rather than saying, well, what's causing that particular demographic to commit crime and what can we do to get them out of that cycle, that terrible cycle? Rather than assessing that and dealing with that, the narrative instead was, well, the reason why this group is being targeted disproportionately is because you're a racist. And so you have to now fix that. It's your problem. It's not them committing crime. It's you perceiving them as committing crime, right? And it's like, well, no, they're actually just committing crime. And maybe we should actually figure out what is it that's causing this particular demographic to commit crime. Is it because they're lacking resources? Is it because they're lacking, socioeconomic standing? Is it cultural? Is it inside of their culture? And they're being taught it's okay. I mean, we have to be looking at, but then that's racist. How dare you say that? Well, why don't we look at it and find out? I mean, we have to. Otherwise, we're never going to solve the problem. But certainly decriminalizing it's not helping.
Yeah, California passed two laws I should mention because I think they're very revealing. One is called the Racial Justice Act of 2020. And effectively, it allowed, even on a retroactive basis, defendants to challenge their convictions based on the inference of any sort of racial animus in any part of their trial, including a foreman, a jury member, police officers involved in the case, or most insidiously, they could demonstrate this through statistical evidence that had nothing to do with the actual facts of the case. So if there was more arrests of Black people in a particular police precinct, that could be enough to challenge a conviction. And in several very prominent cases that happened called the city of Antioch, major gang enhancement sentencing was undone because of, in this case, text messages that were discovered by police officers in that jurisdiction that were racist. Had nothing to do with the facts of the case. And this is resulting, of course, in a bottleneck of claims because every defense attorney now claims some sort of basis under the Racial Justice Act. Then we passed something called, very soon after that, called SB 3070, which effectively prevents prosecutors from challenging, using peremptory challenges against jurors if those jurors happen to fit within a certain categories of protected minorities. So if a juror said like, well, my son, was arrested by cops and I hate cops and he happens to be black, prosecutors can no longer use peremptory challenges to remove that juror.
Jeez. Well, Chris, look, California is a mess. I left. Maybe, and I get it. That's not tenable for everybody to just hightail it out of there. But at some point, you would think with the mass exodus of people, and I never thought I would leave California. I loved it there. I love the weather. There's a lot to love about California: the food, the weather, the people are great. As much as people want to kind of rag on Californians, actually, California people are great. It's a great place. It's a great place.
Yeah.
But it's very, very difficult to live there for a variety of reasons. One of them being, as you've just brought up, the failed state, and with all of these, with the crime and the people the homelessness and whatnot. And then on top of it, a lot of us have left because of the bureaucracy. And, suddenly we've got extremely high insurance rates because of the fires. The insurance has skyrocketed. We've got, we're paying premiums to the government with taxes. We're paying premiums to insurance companies. We're paying premiums to live in this place that is ultimately reeling into squalor.
Don't forget energy. We pay more for
our
energy than Hawaii. But the fact is, you are more likely to get mugged, beaten, assaulted, burglarized, and robbed and carjacked in California by double than in any other state in the country.
Yeah. So on top of that, right. And our energy bills, people would pass out if they found out how high our energy. When I tell people my energy bill every month was $400, they're thinking I lived in a mansion. I'm like, no, I lived in a normal sized 1,900 square foot house, and it was $400 a month just for the electric bill. Now in Idaho, it's like $80 or less or something along those lines. I mean, for whatever reason, we're being price gouged in California. And what do we get for it besides, the weather's good? So that's why you stick around, because you get good weather.
Policy. Kim, these are all policies. That's why I say this is a failure by design, right?
Yeah.
This is not spontaneous. I mean, yes, there's a lot of actors involved and there's a lot of factors involved, but it all does stem from some form of policy or directive.
Yeah.
And that's what the heart of my book is about, and I think that's the heart of the problem.
Right. Well, and people should take it as a warning, because it's not just California. This will happen in a lot of the blue states in particular. A lot of these other states, I know here in Idaho, people are worried because a lot of Californians came flooding in, and they're like, oh no, don't Californicate Idaho. We see that all the time here on signs.
It's a risk. That's a reasonable risk.
Right. It's a reasonable risk. So people should pay attention to what is it that caused, that's the key crux of the issue, and you're addressing it, which is what is the cause of this? Because if you can identify the cause, then you could prevent it from happening in your own communities, or at least in California, then start to try to reverse it. Chris, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. It was great talking with you.
Really appreciate it. We do have the links down below for the book, also to follow you on social. All of that is down below. Definitely appreciate your time, and best of luck to you still stuck in California. Bye. Thanks for watching this clip from the full Kim Iversen Show, which you can check out Monday through Friday, 2 p.m. Pacific, 5 p.m. Eastern. The show airs live. It is a 1-hour live show Monday through Friday. Just head to KimIversonShow.com. See you there.